Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Welcome to the World Over Live. We've got a lot to cover this evening. There's a looming partial government shutdown in Washington, and the bishops of the U.S. are decrying some of the proposed cuts. What do you think? Should social welfare programs and foreign aid be the priority in U.S. budgeting? We'll talk with Congressman Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska about all of that and get into the horrendous violence in Ivory Coast this week, where 1,000 Christians were murdered. And later, Father Joseph Fessio of Ignatius Press is here to discuss Pope Benedict's latest book, the New York Times best-selling Jesus of Nazareth, Volume 2. And finally, in an exclusive interview, Cardinal Joseph Zen will join us. He's the former Bishop of Hong Kong. He'll tell us about the true state of relations between the Vatican and Communist China, and it's not what you might expect. If you'd like to be part of the show, the number is 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. The post-election power struggle in the Ivory Coast took a turn for the worse this week. According to reports, nearly 1,000 civilians, mostly believed to be Christians, were massacred in a western city. What is not clear is who is responsible for the killings. As many as 100,000 have fled to safer regions and neighboring countries. A missionary priest was kidnapped this past week, as well as rebels overtook a seminary in the Ivorian capital. According to the local bishop, church facilities have been looted and destroyed. Violence has afflicted the Ivory Coast since November, when President Laurent Gbagbo refused to recognize a former prime minister's presidential election victory. Respective forces loyal to each side have been fighting ever since. United Nations and French forces are trying to stabilize the situation. Meanwhile, Pope Benedict's newly designated personal emissary to the country can't get there. Cardinal Peter Turkson, head of the Vatican's Justice and Peace Office, only got as far as Ghana, as most flights into the Ivory Coast have been halted due to the fighting. More about the massacre and the unrest later in the show. As the prospects of a military stalemate appear on the horizon in Libya, the Apostolic Vicar of Tripoli has reported more civilian deaths. According to Bishop Giovanni Martinelli, 8 civilians, mostly women and children, were killed as a result of an April 1st bombing by international forces. Bishop Martinelli told Fides News that the Libyan people are fed up with the situation and the bombing and the fighting, which has driven more than 400,000 Libyans to find refuge in Tunisia and Egypt. NATO officials say Gaddafi forces have been effective in protecting tanks and artillery in densely populated areas, using civilians as human shields. And NATO further admitted that they're carrying out few airstrikes out of fear of creating more civilian casualties. And deadly protests have broken out across Afghanistan in response to a Christian minister's recent burning of the Quran in Florida. At least 25 people were killed in unrest over the weekend, including several United Nations workers. President Hamid Karzai called upon U.S. officials to punish Reverend Terry Jones, who gained notoriety in 2010 when he first threatened to burn the Quran. The president of the Pakistani Bishops' Conference weighed in on Jones as well. Archbishop Lawrence Saldhana said Jones should be controlled and should understand the harm that has been done, end quote. The Archbishop further worried about potential attacks against Christians in Pakistan as a result of the Quran burning, saying it could become ugly. And government and church leaders from across Ireland joined thousands on Wednesday at the funeral of a Catholic policeman slain by Irish Republican Army dissidents. The rare killing has highlighted the dramatic social changes of Northern Ireland's peace process. Just weeks on the job, Constable Ronan Kerr was killed on Saturday by a booby-tracked bomb. It was hidden under his car in the town of Omagh. First Minister Peter Robinson, a Protestant, had never attended a Catholic church service before, and Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, a Catholic, had never before attended a policeman's funeral. McGuinness, along with Jerry Adams, who also attended the funeral, were commanders of the IRA, the underground group responsible for the deaths of nearly 300 police officers during the 4-decade campaign to force Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom and into the Irish Republic. 2 arrests have been made in connection with the murder. And back here in Washington, still no budget deal. And not unlike the contentious health care bill of last year, abortion funding has once again become the sticking point. Democrats have objected to efforts by the GOP to defund Planned Parenthood, abortion in the District of Columbia, certain Environmental Protection Agency programs, and other items. President Obama noted his objection earlier in the week.
They're original.
Thank you. What else does the White House...
What we can't be doing is using last year's budget process to have arguments about abortion, to have arguments about the Environmental Protection Agency, to try to use this budget negotiation as a vehicle for every ideological or political difference between the two parties.
Meanwhile, the House, and with Republican and Democratic support, passed an alternative measure on Thursday that would have funded the military for the rest of the year and the government for another week. That stopgap measure will likely go nowhere. The Democratic Senate is refusing to consider the bill, and the president has promised a veto. And as the fate of the 2011 budget hangs in the balance, House Republicans on Tuesday revealed their budget plans for 2012. Budget Chairman Paul Ryan touted that the plan will not only pay off the national debt and spur economic growth, but that it would also provide real health and retirement security. The plan was roundly and quickly criticized by Democrats, who claim the Ryan budget will hurt seniors, the disabled, and low-income people. The proposal is far-reaching, to say the least. Some of the highlights of the 2012 budget proposal: $6 trillion in reduced federal spending over the next 10 years, and no funding for President Obama's signature health care law. And also, the 2012 is also on the mind of President Obama. He officially launched his re-election campaign on Monday. It was a virtual launch, literally. The 2012 campaign was announced via email and text message to supporters, directing them to the campaign website. The president himself did not appear in the announcement. Instead, a campaign ad featured a montage of ordinary, everyday supporters touting the president and his agenda and the need to support him in 2012. And the retired Bishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen, met with Speaker of the House John Boehner on Wednesday. Both the Speaker and the Cardinal have been longtime critics of Chinese policies, including limitation on human and religious rights and the state's one-child policy of forced sterilizations and abortions. In a statement released after the meeting, Boehner pledged his unequivocal support for religious freedom in China, citing the communist regime's recent attempts to force Catholic bishops to participate in supporting the government-run Catholic Patriotic Association. He further thanked Cardinal Zen for his courage and the sacrifices he's made in the cause of religious freedom. Cardinal Zen joined us in the studio a little earlier. That interview is straight ahead. And remember, you only have a few more weeks to download your free copy of the Gospel of Mark from the Truth and Life Dramatized Audio Bible. It's the only Vatican-endorsed, fully dramatized New Testament available anywhere. The free download is at RaymondArroyo.com. If you'd like to purchase the entire audio Bible, click at the banner at the top of the website. And if you're planning a visit to D.C., why not experience the world over in person? Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Drop us an email, worldoverdc@yahoo.com, and we'll reserve a seat for you. Up next, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry joins us to talk about the recent violence in Ivory Coast and the budget standoff in Washington. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Once again, Raymond Arroyo.
The United States is facing a partial government shutdown if the Congress fails to come to a deal. Once again, abortion is the sticking point. We'll address that in a moment, as well as the continuing violence in the Ivory Coast with my next guest. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as its subcommittee on Africa. Would you welcome back to the program Nebraska's 1st District's Jeff Fortenberry. Congressman, thanks for coming back.
Pleasure to be with you.
Tell me, what's happening in the Ivory Coast? We hear these stories, Caritas counting 1,000 dead. Who are these people? Who are the wrongdoers here?
Well, it's not clear. That question is one of the many unknown questions as to what's going on. All of this stems from the fact that the current president, Gbagbo, refused to step down after what appears to be a legitimate election last year. And now the troops loyal to the new coming president, as well as UN troops who are present there.
Yeah, I mean, they've got peacekeeping forces on the ground. Why is this happening?
10,000 peacekeeping forces. The UN Security Council, with U.S. approval, has actually empowered those UN peacekeeping forces to more aggressively engage militarily. So apparently now the President Gbagbo is surrounded in his palace. But nonetheless,
he's in the bunker and saying he's not coming out.
That's apparently the case. This civil strife, though, even if we're able, or the international community is able to force him out and a legitimate government is able to quickly take over, you worry that the divisions are so strong, having led to some incident where 1,000 people have been killed, that this may continue into the future, even though a new government is on the horizon.
The nuncio there was saying that priests had been targeted, and this was earlier portrayed when the first news of the 1,000 dead came out. It was stressed that they were Christian dead. Yes. Is there a religious undertow to this?
Well, I've tried to unpack that very fact. Apparently, the Ivory Coast has been a society that's tolerated religious diversity. The ambassador from the country recently came to me and stressed that very point. I actually had a conversation with the papal nuncio as well to try to get a clear picture of that very point. And
and you have some news on that emissary that was sent in.
Apparently, Cardinal Turkson, the special envoy from the Vatican, who is from the neighboring country of Ghana, was sent by the Vatican to attempt some reconciliation there, because the country has about 20% of its population is Catholic. The former president apparently was a very faithful Catholic, and the Vatican, I assume, thought there might be an option there for them to intercede and help heal this problem, but apparently that was not successful.
I want to switch gears, talk about this budget battle. We've been talking about it for months, and it is consuming Washington. Everybody's trembling. There's a government shutdown. They're going to close the Smithsonian's on my family. I won't be able to go. Tell me, where are we now? There was a deal passed today. This would have been just a small resolution, continuing resolution, that would have funded the Pentagon, made sure military personnel were paid through September, and funded the government for another week. The House passed it. Why is it dead on arrival? Why is the president saying it's a diversion?
Well, many of us in the House want to keep the government open while also working on decreasing spending. The budget situation is out of control. We are borrowing 40 cents on every dollar that's spent. The debt, the national debt, is now $14 trillion. Is simply unsustainable. This year's deficit alone is $1.6 trillion. There has to be serious movement and serious resolve to tightening the belt just a bit so we can get ourselves back onto a pathway of fiscal restoration.
You heard the president in that bite, Congressman, in our earlier news segment. He says, why are we having a debate about abortion now? Harry Reid came out last night and said it's ideology that's holding up this agreement. They are digging their heels in, and the White House and the Democrats are saying, we will not give in on these Planned Parenthood cuts. We will not give in on the EPA cuts. What's the problem?
Well, then it's their responsibility for shutting this government down. If you want to know what the government does, watch what the government spends. And if you're going to spend taxpayer money on abortion, like we do here in D.C., sadly, if you're going to underwrite organizations like Planned Parenthood that are inextricably intertwined with the abortion industry, then you're going to have an ideological battle on your hands. So the president and Senate Majority Harry Reid would rather shut the government down than pull back these highly controversial government subsidies to these organizations that are just simply wrong.
I'm astounded.
We should have these ideological battles over the budget.
Well, appropriations is an ideological battle. Budgeting is always an ideological battle. You're clearly funding something and not funding something else. So I don't quite get the reasoning of any of this.
Well, the temporary measure that was passed today in the House, which apparently will not be passed by the Senate nor accepted by the President, would have simply cut back by $12 billion and kept us going until a better deal or a longer-term deal could be worked out for the remainder of the year. It also does fund the troops through the remainder of the year so that people who are out there fighting, in case the government would shut down, are going to receive a paycheck.
I want to shift to what the bishops are doing. They put out an action alert, encouraging Catholics, encouraging all the faithful to call their congressman, call their representative, and they say the voices of the poor and vulnerable are not being heard. Shared sacrifice need not be disproportionate cuts in programs that service the poor and those abroad. You would say what?
Well, foreign affairs is an important part of the United States budget. But again, we're in a situation now where we're in an unsustainable spending crisis. The government has grown from about $2.9 trillion to $3.8 trillion just in the last 3 years since 2008. So many of the programmatic elements that are being reduced are simply going back a few short years to a more normal, reasonable level. And everybody's going to have to share in this sacrifice. If I had the scalpel, I might do it a little bit differently. I think international outreach and aid to the vulnerable actually helps us build relationships, is essential to national security as well as economic trade and sustainable development.
I want to run down the laundry list quickly in our remaining minutes. 2.3, this is what the bishops are highlighting as important budget items to consider. 2.3 billion job training programs, 1.8 billion Head Start, 875 million for international disaster assistance, 800 million for international food aid, 904 million for migrant and refugee resettlement. Now, the bishops get a big chunk of money for their own migrant and refugee resettlement program. Is this worrying about their own concerns?
Well, we are not going to help anyone in America unless this fiscal crisis is resolved. We are undermining, with the level of spending, the ability of the economy to turn around, to create jobs. And when people have work, they actually increase revenue to the Treasury by paying taxes. So the idea here is let's all take a deep breath and pull this budget a little bit back, share in this sacrifice so that we can get the economy turned around, people working, and actually that will help with the growth of the overall revenue situation in America. You can't sustain this level of deficit spending. You simply cannot do it. It causes really three problems, if I could talk about that briefly.
Really fast.
It makes us line up at the Bank of China. It creates inflation as the Federal Reserve particularly is tempted to monetize its debt, print money, which is a tax that hits the poor the hardest because they can't adjust, and people on fixed incomes. And third is it's unjust. It passes on debt to children and grandchildren for the way in which we're living.
Very good. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, thanks for being here. We'll stay in touch with you as this battle continues. When we return, we'll talk about Jesus of Nazareth, Volume 2 of the Pope's latest book with his publisher, Father Joseph Fessio. The World Over Live continues in a moment, and call us and email us. We'll be back in a moment.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Pope Benedict XVI's latest book, Jesus of Nazareth, Holy Week, from the entrance into Jerusalem to the resurrection, became an instant New York Times bestseller, and it remains on the list today. Here to discuss the new work, the implementation of the new Roman Missal, and much more is the Pope's publisher and former student, founder of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph Fessio. Welcome back to the show, Father. Great to see you. Now, tell me, this book, what do we learn here about Jesus Christ, his person, his mission, that perhaps we didn't know before or couldn't understand before?
Well, he goes into it with great depth. He's a great teacher, and he has a purpose in this book which is very unusual. Namely, he's trying to meld together historical scholarship, which sought for the Jesus of history, but always got thinner and thinner as they said, we can't be sure he did this or said that. He's trying to be able to show that Jesus has a real figure, flesh and blood, and you can rely on the Gospels to love him and know him. That's what he's doing in the book.
He also spends a lot of time in here batting away criticisms. He deals with controversies, theological controversies, that Jesus was a revolutionary. There's that section on cleansing the temple. Talk to us about that. That is often held up as, you see, he's a zealot, he's a revolutionary, he's a radical. That's what we're called to be.
Well, what he does in this book is when those issues come up, he always goes back to the Old Testament to show what the Old Testament background was. And in that context, he shows that the real purpose of Jesus' cleansing the temple was to show that the temple was over. The temple was going to be finished. He was going to be the new temple, the new Torah.
He also deals with a lot of gospel contradictions or seeming contradictions. This is not, I have to say, this is a heavy-duty book.
Well,
this is not for the faint of heart. It's not a devotional, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's
not
Sheen's Life of Christ.
I think anybody that's relatively well-educated and is serious about it can do it, but you can't read it from cover to cover. You got to meditate on it. You got to. This is the fruit of many, many decades of prayer and meditation as well as study. So it's just not something you can read like a novel.
Yeah. Now, Reuters said it's highly theological and academic recounting of the last week of Jesus' life. I think that's a little reductive.
No, that's a little too much.
Yeah, some of the press accounts have described it that way. I also find as this book moves on, it becomes more personal, if you will. Maybe that's not the right description, but it seems...
I think it's true. The second half, I think, is more personal than the first half.
Yeah.
And I think he's getting into the serious center, the crucial, in many senses of the word, part of Jesus' life. And he always he talks about Jesus as someone who's living in the present, too, and how it affects us. So there's always kind of exhortation in this thing.
You've known this Pope intimately for a long time.
Not intimately, but well.
Well, but you've known him well. You've been certainly a student of his, and you've known him for many years. Tell me where he finds the time to write a 300-page volume, and this isn't light writing. I mean, he's got to have a series of books and around him where he's consulting at all times.
He does. He calls them his friends. In his autobiography, or not, his interview he gave in November, it was published in November to Peter Zabel, he talks about the fact that he carried his books with him from the congregation to the papal palace because those are his friends. He knows them well. But I was rereading his book, Introduction to Christianity, and I noted lots of similarities. And when he was 40 years old, he was brilliant. He's still brilliant. But he's kept all that knowledge. He doesn't forget. So it's easy for him to write because it's all there.
It's the fruit. Yeah, it's the overflow of what he's absorbed throughout his whole lifetime. But it is, there are some who have criticized him and said he should spend less time writing and more time poping, if you will. Well, what would you say to that?
The most important thing a pope can do is appoint bishops. And he's taken quietly a direct role in that. He's appointed Cardinal Ouellet to be head of the Congregation of Bishops. And I can tell you from the west coast of the USA, Raymond, we've had a home run after home run after home run. The latest bishop appointments have been fantastic. And I think that's going to continue. Yeah. Also, Cardinal Burke in Rome is on the Congregation of Bishops. So the Pope can't do it all. He can inspire, but you have to have bishops running seminaries and with their priests to make the church healthy.
And teaching is an important, central to that role.
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk about the Jewish reaction to this work. The Jewish groups and Jewish leaders have been overwhelmingly embraced this work because it is very clear in teaching what the church has taught for a good long time, that the Jewish people are not collectively guilty of Jesus' death. Explain that to us and why that persists.
Very quickly, but you have to read the book to get the whole thing, obviously, all you out there. But he says that in John's gospel, Jesus says, the Jews are responsible, but John means by that the temple authorities, not the whole people. Mark says the crowd, but he points out that the crowd who said, give us Barabbas, was not a crowd of Jews generically. It was Barabbas' supporters who wanted him to be released. So they didn't even know who Jesus was. So that's not the Jewish people. And then finally, when in Matthew's gospel, the people say, his blood be upon us and upon our children. The Pope says, that's not the blood of Abel crying for vengeance. That's the blood of Jesus, which is redemption. And that is an implicit prophecy. They do need the blood of Jesus to be upon them and their children to redeem them. And it's very, very beautiful. But also, this is not quite as prominent a section, but in the destruction of the temple, he says that when the temple was destroyed, that was the center of Jewish worship for both Christians and for Jews, because the Christians went to the temple after, to pray. So both Jews and Christians had to rethink the Old Testament. And there was a rabbinical rethinking, which made the Torah, the law, the center. And there was a Christian rethinking in which Jesus was the center. But he says Jesus is the Torah, and he says we need to bring that dialogue back together. He's for dialogue with the Jews.
Yeah. I want to throw this out to callers. The number 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. If you have any questions about or confusions in the as you read through the Scriptures, Father's here to answer them for you. Or if you've read the new book and want to comment on it, please do that as well. Let's talk for a moment. You are billed as the Pope's primary publisher in the U.S.
That's true.
Now, tell us what that means, because I know there are others who do, I don't want to call them minor works, but the lesser works, the Wednesday audiences and that sort of thing.
Raymond, let me reveal an exclusive to you.
Okay.
Back in 1995, in December, I had an inkling he might become Pope someday. And I wrote him a letter. I said, would you give us the rights to the English language of your works in the future? He wrote back in January, he said, of course. So he gave us the rights to all of his works in English from that point onward.
Wow. Now, there were prior agreements, I guess, the Vatican made on the first volume of this book. Is that what happened?
That's a long story, Raymond, and probably not for on air, but let me just say that for volume 2, even though a New York publisher offered $2.1 million for the advance,
wow,
the Vatican said, no, Ignatius Press is publishing this book.
So you paid 2.6?
No, we did not. We didn't.
Okay.
We paid a lot less.
Tell me about the beatification of John Paul II coming up, what this means to the Church. There are some who critique the process. They say it's too fast.
Well, I'm more on the side of the critics in one sense, because I do think it's kind of fast, especially he's a historic figure. And with historic figures, you should get a little more distance to see how their work really plays out. However, on the other hand, I can see very well that he was a tremendous figure in the Church. Look at the good he did. And the fact that he's recognized for his holiness is just a great encouragement to all those people who looked upon him as their hero.
And he certainly, I mean, when you look at the scope and the sweep of that papacy. But I tend to agree with you. All the files aren't even open yet.
Right.
So, but I imagine the congregation has looked into
I'm sure
a good
they
deal
have,
of
yeah.
that.
I mean, they're not going to simply, airbrush him. But I mean, if he's not a saint, we're in trouble.
Yeah, I agree. Then we're all in deep trouble. Let's talk about this new translation of the Roman Missal that's about to come out. For years, you
40 years
and our dear mother Angelica battled this one out, trying to make sure that these translations were true, literate, and reflected the majesty that they should.
Yes.
Are you content with this new translation?
I'm delighted with the new translation, especially now during the period of Lent. This is the last Lent I will have to do the suffering penance of reading those collects, which are so banal. But the collects that are coming out now are true translations. They're beautiful, they're powerful, they're theological, you can reflect on them. Really, I'm happy with this.
Do you have the sense that people are even aware that this change is coming, though, Father?
Oh, I think so. Oh, those who go to Mass are, because it's been highly, I think too much has been made of it in one sense, because as far as the person in the pew, there's not that many changes he's going to have to be making himself.
Well, there's the "and with your spirit" instead of "also with you." It is right and just instead of "it is right to give him thanks and praise." I believe in God instead of "we believe in God." There's a little
How long does that take to figure that out?
Well, I would hope not long, but they really should highlight those in the missal.
Exactly. Well,
the changes should be, bolded so people, can really see them coming.
Well, I think if you use Magnificat, for example, it will be in there. Also, I think that bishops wisely are using this as a teaching moment. We didn't get to preparation for the change back in 1959.
Right. Yep.
But at least now people are being told, look, let's know the Mass better. Let's get to understand what we're doing more. It's good.
Let's talk for a moment about the story when the new translation, the new American Bible came out, the Bishop's Bible. There was much made about the changing some of these words because in the vernacular today, their meaning has changed, like the word booty. So they changed it to whatever, precious treasures or something. Is that necessary? Is that advisable? Is that a way to go about translating the Scripture?
The only English language Bible that corresponds to the present translation guidelines of the Church is the Revised Standard Edition, Revised Standard Version, Second Catholic Edition, published by that obscure publisher, Ignatius Press. Yes.
I knew you'd say that.
And the African bishops are using it for the lectionary.
So, because it can be used in liturgy.
It can.
Unlike the New American Bible, which my Protestant friends come up to me and say, wait a minute, you all have a Bible that the bishops translated. I said, yes. And you can't use that at Mass. I said, no, you can't.
Right.
It's
bizarre. It's bizarre.
It is peculiar.
I believe with the new crop of bishops coming online, we're going to straighten this thing out in the next 4 or 5 years.
Now, another bit of this reform of the reform that was always central to Benedict, and I think looms over this papacy, is his opening of the old rite, the extraordinary rite of the Mass.
Right.
Any week now, right after Easter, if you believe some of the Rome reportage that we're seeing, there will be a clarification of his Summorum Pontificum, which opened the way to this, to have the new Mass side by side with the old Mass.
Well, it'll be 3.5 years overdue because it was supposed to come out about 3 months after the motu proprio. But yes, they finally they've got it done.
What do you think's going to be in there?
I'm not sure. Don't know. I'm not a prophet. You know more about those things than I do.
What do you think should be in there? Given the kind of tepid reception that the motu proprio got.
Here's what I think the Pope wants. In his letter introducing the motu proprio, he said he wants to see a mutual enrichment of the two forms, and he wants to see a healing of the Church. By healing, he means he sees a break in tradition from the old Mass to the new that's never taken place in the history of the Church. He wants to heal that. I think what he wants to move towards is a blended form.
This is a question that just came in. Father Fessio, can you address Pope Benedict publishing the apostolic exhortation Verbum Domini at almost the same time as Volume 2 of Jesus of Nazareth and how they were related to each other? Thank you, Beth in Raleigh.
Totally coincidental. I mean, Verbum Domini is the post-synodal exhortation from the last synod, which was on Scripture.
Right.
But at the synod fathers put together a list of what they want the Pope to discuss in that thing, and he gets a committee, and he drafts something, shows it to them, and goes back and forth. So it's translated. You just can't schedule that. So, also, this book was supposed to come out in November, but
translation.
Because if you look at the preface, it shows that he wrote it and he signed it on the feast of St. Mark, April 25th, 2010. Why so long?
Yeah.
Number one, they wanted a simultaneous release. They wanted to translate. But number two, all of a sudden, the Vatican publisher got a new manuscript in October, which was Light of the World, because the Pope had given this interview in July, and suddenly there's a new manuscript. They didn't want to issue 2 books in the same season.
I see.
And then thinking that this is about Passion and Holy Week,
Easter,
it made sense to issue it now.
Push it back, yeah. The translation process, I know, had to be onerous.
Well, actually, last time Double A used our translator, Adrian Walker, to do it, and we were going to do that this time. But for this edition, the Vatican actually did all the translations themselves. The Secretary of State did. Yeah.
Really?
It was a very good job, though. It was quite well done.
I know, it's very clean.
I want to add one thing, Raymond. In rereading this book, it is so fantastic. I am designing 4 theology courses for online, use college credit, through College of St. Thomas More online, CSTM.org, CSTMO.org, because he is such a great teacher. We're going to have a class on Jesus with the 2 Jesus books, a class on the liturgy, and a class on Introduction to the Faith with Introduction to Christianity. I mean, I think this man has a legacy which is going to last for the next century.
Such rich work. I mean, his earlier work on the liturgy, the Introduction to Christianity. I mean, these are beautiful works that you really, the more you dip into them, and you're right. There is a richness here. You know, as I said, the early part of this book, I think, to the lay reader might be off-putting, but they should stick with it. By chapter 6 or so, it really, I mean, it really takes off, and it becomes a guided tour, if you will, through the Gospels and its intricacies.
What's that yellow book over there, Raymond?
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. Is there a study guide for this?
There is a study guide, yes, from Ignatius Press. Ignatius.com, don't forget that.
Okay, we won't. Tell me, if you will, now, this, I agree with everything you said about Jesus of Nazareth.
Thank you, Raymond.
Then this curious yellow book shows up on my desk today. I flipped through this. It says on it, you can't read it, it says UCAT. Now, I don't know why publishers are into publishing things in yellow. I hate yellow, but I won't get into that. It's an ugly color to publish. But I'm just going to...
It's the papal flag.
I'm going to let that go.
It's the papal flag,
I'm going to let that go.
What are you, Protestant or something?
No, I'm not at all. But it says UCAT.
Yeah.
What is this?
It's a youth catechism, and Cardinal Schönborn was the one who then Cardinal Ratzinger commissioned to do the large adult catechism. But 3 years ago or 2 years ago, some young people came to him and said, you know, Cardinal Schönborn, this isn't really addressing us. We want something that reaches our young people, ourselves, and our friends. He said, why don't we write one then? So he got some theologians and educators to draft an abridgment of the Big Catechism. Then he had 2 summer camps with 50 teenagers at each summer camp, but engaged teenagers, serious ones, you know. And they actually developed this book in which they took the Catechism of the Catholic Church. They have question and answer, they got a commentary, but they got sidebars with pictures they took, with sayings of saints, with glossaries and things. It's a fantastic book for young people.
Yeah, it's beautifully printed and published.
And I know you haven't read the whole book, but read what the Pope says on the back. This is the Pope's own words on the back here.
Yeah, I read the Pope's introduction. Okay. Study the Catechism. This is my heartfelt desire. Study the Catechism with passion and perseverance. Study it in the quiet in your room. Read it with a friend. And he goes on and on. You need to be deeply rooted in the faith and the generation of your parents.
That's interesting. That's a little barb there, isn't it?
I saw that little twist of the knife there. Yeah. That's interesting.
But the Holy Father really is excited about this catechism, and he has asked that it be in the backpack of every participant of World Youth Day this year.
So this is going to be released during World Youth Day, or it's out now?
Well, it's released this week, but it is going to be the official catechism of World Youth Day.
Why UCAT?
Youth Catechism. And young people talk like that, Raymond. You see, we don't get it, but they do.
UCAT? That's like 1950s.
No, well, everything goes around,
cool
comes around.
Let's go to Craig, South Carolina. Go ahead, Craig. What's your question?
Hey, Raymond. How you doing? How you doing, Father? God bless you guys both. I love Mother Angelica and the new Mass coming. I can't wait. Well, the whole new Mass coming. My question is the sticky point throughout the year was receiving communion in the hand, which was never really authorized by the papacy. My question is, will the faithful be able to kneel and receive communion like we're always supposed to in our tradition of our church?
Okay. Father?
That's a great question. First, let me tell you that there's never been a prohibition of kneeling for communion, even to this day. Every Catholic has the right to kneel for communion. No matter what the bishop says, no matter what the priest says, that's a right you have, and that can be backed up by papal documents and documents of the Congregation for Worship. You can find it at adoremus.org, at adoremus.org. The Holy Father himself, as of 2 summers ago, will no longer give communion unless you're kneeling and take it on the tongue.
Yeah.
And he says we need to restore the sense of reverence for this sacrament.
No, this has been, we see that progressively, and he makes the wonderful case in I can't remember which book. It must be The Spirit of the Liturgy.
Spirit of the Liturgy, that's
where
right.
He makes the case as to why and the whole orientation of the Mass.
Yes.
It's beautifully laid out there.
I think that's the greatest book ever done on the Mass. Really, it's extraordinary.
I agree. Father Joe Fessio, thanks so much
Raymond,
for being
good talking
here,
to you again. God bless
you. Yeah, Jesus of Nazareth, Holy Week, from the entrance into Jerusalem to the resurrection, is available at bookstores everywhere and through the EWTN Religious Catalog, of course. And when we return, we'll discuss the relationship between the Vatican and China with Cardinal Joseph Zen, the former Bishop of Hong Kong. He has a huge disagreement with some at the Holy See. He'll get specific when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. He's known as the conscience of China, the former Bishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen. He visited Capitol Hill yesterday to make leaders there aware of the way the Chinese government is dividing the Catholic Church. There's a government-run Catholic Patriotic Association, loyal to the Chinese government, and an underground church loyal to the Pope. And though it appeared relations between the Vatican and China might be improving, recent events tell a different tale. Cardinal Zen recently wrote a piece criticizing certain congregations at the Holy See for defying the Pope's will in regard to China. Here's a bit of my exclusive interview with Cardinal Joseph Zen. So we have this Patriotic Association, which is nothing more than the Chinese government's creation. Yeah. And they have taken over churches, they have clergy, they have bishops, they ordain bishops. And then you have what I've always described as the underground church. Mm-hmm. Now, increasingly, Your Eminence, people tell me you shouldn't refer to the faithful in that way. You, Raymond, in your reportage, are dividing the people. Please tell me your perspective.
This wrong policy has made our underground community frustrated, they fear abandoned, even considered inconvenient, disturbing. But actually, they are the people who have been loyal to the Holy See, have suffered so many years, and now they really have reason to feel frustrated. You see, many old bishops died in that community, and they are not given successors. While in the official church, many bishops are being ordained. And so surely that doesn't seem to be fair. And the trouble is that even the letter of the Holy Father,
in 2007.
Yeah, in which he had many words of encouragement to this underground community, has been wrongly interpreted. And that misinterpretation could go on for so long. Obviously, with the blessing of somebody on high in the Holy See. And they are saying that, oh, everybody should come out from the underground, and because the Holy Father wants everybody to be united. But that's a wrong interpretation. The Holy Father is talking about reconciliation of hearts, of spirits, but not a reunification in one structure, because that is simply impossible.
I keep hearing repeatedly, even from people in China, they say, well, you have the Patriotic Association, but many of the faithful there, many of the bishops, many of the priests in the Patriotic Association are secretly loyal to Pope Benedict. Do you believe that?
I was the first to say that back in 1989, because I had a privileged opportunity to go to teach in the seminaries in China. Actually, I was the first one to request and then to be accepted to teach in those seminaries. I started right after Tiananmen Square incident, so 89, till 96, when they made me the coadjutor bishop in Hong Kong. So for 7 years, I worked 6 months a year in China. And then with my great pleasure, consolation, I discovered even in the so-called open church, everybody in their heart loyal to the Holy See. So I said publicly that we have only one church because everybody loved the Pope. That was true, but in the following years, many things changed. The Holy See, the Holy Father, was very generous to recognize many of those bishops in the open church who were ordained illegitimately. And then when they started choosing the young bishops in that open church by election, which is mostly manipulated, but still, when the candidate is acceptable, the Holy See approved those candidates. And that was very generous. But the Holy See did not request these legitimate bishops to withdraw, publicly from the Patriotic Association. An obvious meaning is that they should work from within that church to change the situation. And that one was made very clear in the letter of the Holy Father of 2007. The Holy Father said, when you receive the communion with the Holy See, you must live coherently with your status. But many didn't do that.
And now we have a situation in November where you have illicit ordinations taking place. Now, I thought the Chinese government said, we will work with the Vatican and we will allow them to appoint the bishops and then approve them. Apparently, that's no longer the policy, because just in November, you had an illicit ordination where bishops, underground bishops, were rounded up and brought to this fake consecration.
Not exactly underground bishops, but bishops already in the open. Actually, bishops who are already many years in the open, except the one who is just recently came to the open church. Now, they choose all legitimate bishops to go to that, so very mischievous, you see.
Validly ordained bishops approved by the Vatican.
And then they used the force for some of them to bring them there. But unfortunately, several were not forced to go there. You can see that they are there willingly. So, this was an incredible surprise because for one whole year, there were many 9 ordination of bishops with approval of both parts. Now, you must remember that somebody at that time said, oh, now, see, everything's all right. Beijing government accepts the bishop chosen by the Holy Father.
Right.
I said, oh, come on. You are too optimistic. My suspicion is that the Vatican may have made too many concessions. And so it's not necessarily a good thing to have those ordinations.
Okay, interpret that for us, because people don't quite understand what this means. What is the intention of the Chinese government? Is this a provocative gesture to show the Vatican who's boss?
Oh, I think so. I would say it's a slap in the face of the Holy Father. After so many concessions from the Holy See, now in this particular case, the discussion had not yet concluded, so they should wait for a conclusion, and they went on by themselves saying, we don't wait anymore.
Now,
that's very,
you
very
recently wrote a piece very critical of the Vatican position and the Vatican relationship with the Chinese government. You called out a triumvirate in Rome. Who are you talking about?
For a long time, the Congregation for Evangelization followed a very wrong policy.
And what is that policy? You charge that it's an appeasement policy.
Yeah.
It's similar to what was done in the Vatican before John Paul II in the relationship between the Vatican and the communist authorities in Russia.
Exact. You could suspect that long before, but now from the article by Father Hendricks, you see it clearly.
Father Jerome Hendricks, tell us who he is and why you're so opposed to his vision of this relationship.
I'm sorry that we seem to be two enemies. Actually, we worked very well together many years ago, and he is a real China expert. And he did so many good things for the church in China.
And he's a consultant to the congregation on evangelization.
Yes, and now, to carry on those initiatives, he needs always the permission of Mr. Liu Banyan. I suppose you know who is Mr. Liu Banyan.
He is the head of the Patriotic Association in China.
He is de facto pope of the Open Church. But we all agree that you have to accept that compromise. Now, if you want anything to be done, you need permission of Mr. Liu Banyan. That means he can decide on the list of the bishops taking part in those initiatives. So it was okay for once, twice, but in the long run, we realized that the side effect of those good things are very bad, because you strengthen his position.
Because now we've reached a situation where they're in open defiance of the Holy Father.
He is all-powerful in front of the government. And so they see that the foreigners all obey to him. And then the bishops are more and more slaves under him.
You've written, our bishops needed some supply of courage, but instead they received much misplaced compassion, which pushed them deeper and deeper into the mire of slavish subjection. How do you turn this around, given that this seems to be the approach, at least for the moment, from this congregation in Rome that's responsible for this relationship?
Exactly. Because the Holy Father always speaks about courage. But there is another voice from the Holy See which says, oh, we understand your difficulty. And then they are allowed to go to take part in the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the first illegitimate ordinations. They are allowed to go to this 8th General Assembly. So to contradict the voice in the Holy See.
Where do we go from here, and what can Catholics around the world and in the United States do to help their brothers and sisters in this land, who continue to suffer, incidentally, in labor camps and under terrible persecution?
Sure, and especially in the underground, now the community is split because of this confusion. And some try to go into the open, but then they find themselves in a difficult situation because that means to surrender to the government. And those who remain again still in the underground, they feel abandoned by the Holy See. When all the bishops die, they are not given successors. And so it's very, very depressing. Now, I've come to the United States just because I have some suspicion that there is too much optimism around. So I want to come here, tell everybody that there is still no religious freedom in China.
You can see the complete interview with Cardinal Joseph Zen in our World Over After Show on my Seen and Unseen blog at EWTN.com. I'll also put a little after show with Father Joseph Fessio as well. And if you'd like to join me on Facebook and Twitter, I'll send you the link. Until next week, you can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter or on my Fanbook fan page. Just Facebook fan page, not Fanbook. There's no Fanbook. Maybe I need a Fanbook fan page.
Right.
Just go to RaymondArroyo.com. You can click through from there. We'll figure it out together. You can also sign up for my e-blast and get your free, fully dramatized Gospel of Mark from the Truth and Life audio Bible there as well. RaymondArroyo.com. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now. Thanks again, Father.